Rajiv Gandhi's love and passion for the environment predated his time in public office. But it was the insights into the devastating consequences of environmental neglect, gained as he ascended political power, that shaped his vision for the India he dreamt of in the 21st century. He recognized, perhaps more than any of his contemporary political leaders, the vital nexus between real development and the environment, and the eradication of poverty as the prerequisite to reversing the planet's imminent ecological disaster. Working towards this goal became his mission as he traveled around India and the world. At the United Nations, he said,
"The miracles of modern science and the towering achievements of technology have given us a measure of mastery over nature. Economic progress has, however, engendered a callous disregard of the harmony within the ecological system. Therefore, we have to consciously remind ourselves we are a part of nature, we are not apart from nature. We are a strand in the single fabric whose warp and weft link together all that is of the earth and the water, the air and the sky. We have learned to our cost that development which destroys the environment eventually destroys development itself. We have learned to our benefit that development that conserves the environment conserves also the fruits of development. There is thus no fundamental dichotomy between conservation and growth. Yet, striking the right balance between the environmental imperative and the demands of development is not that simple."
Rajiv Gandhi was a man of many parts. His mind would cross the boundaries of conventional way of thinking. And in that particular respect, environment played an extremely important role in considering the economic development programs, the programs relating to socio-economic development and eradication of poverty. His vision of India was to make India a modern country entering into the 21st century.
He was a man of action, and I think he was a man of vision and action, and that was the very endearing thing about him. I think he had a vision that it was a matter of self-images and also world images.
Rajiv Gandhi's perception was that for the environment you'll have to really interact with the Indian communities, with the Indian land and water context, which would really be at the level of a village. He used to always talk of crossing the last mile as far as land, water, development, employment, food. He saw this whole thing as trying to remove the negative cycle with a virtuous cycle.
It was he who perceived the importance of focusing entirely on environment and forests, and thus having a ministry. If it would have functioned as a department, it would not have had the kind of priority and focus which was so important, which everybody, not only nationally but globally, recognizes today.
He built up a powerful Ministry of Environment with powerful laws and so on and so forth. So he was definitely doing those kind of things. He felt that the environmental concern itself was emerging out of developmental inadequacies.
He realized that lack of environmental awareness was leaching us of the full results of development, and that if we were to, in the first instance, attain those developmental goals, and in the second instance, to sustain those achievements, it would be necessary to make environmental conservation an integral part of the development process.
Conservation imposes an escalation in costs. When resources are limited, the increased cost of any one project necessarily means less investment for others. This appears to imply a curtailment of economic growth. When the environment is not protected, damage to the environment will extract its own price.
पानी पहुंचता है गांव में?
हाँ,
पीने का पानी मिलता है?
टैंकर है, टैंकर
टैंकर आता है। कितने दिन में आता है?
दिवस में कितना बार आता है? बे टैंकर। 2 टैंकर 2 बार आते हैं।
खराब के माने?
पानी खराब आता है। पीने जैसा नहीं आता है।
पीने जैसा खराब पानी आता है। डोड़ा से लाते हैं। ऐसे करो, इस तरफ निकलो।
मेरी लड़की है।
क्या हो गया? चोट लगी? दिखाओ। किधर लगी?
हम देख रहे हैं सरकार की तरफ से, राज्य सरकार की तरफ से, केंद्र सरकार की तरफ से कि आपको हर तरह की सहायता मिले। साथ में हम देख रहे हैं कि ऐसा काम हो जिससे सूखे से बचने के लिए कुछ परमानेंट सा काम। Well, we have taken the protection of the environment in India as a very major government program. We have enacted very strong laws last year to help state governments protect the environment. And we will not slow down on this. That without environmental preservation, there can be no sustained development.
It was Rajiv Gandhi who, under his prime ministership, a comprehensive Environment Protection Act was moved by his government and passed in Parliament. And that Environment Protection Act is now the basis for many of the developing countries.
Just about the time he became the prime minister, you had the Bhopal disaster, which then led to the formation of the Environmental Protection Act. And with that, a number of steps were started, environmental impact assessments. They were already taking place in a little more relaxed manner, but after that they became more stronger and stronger. So a number of systems like that emerged during Mr. Gandhi's time. We have some of the most powerful environmental acts compared to anywhere else in the world. So all that is there, and the question is inevitably one of the political will to use these acts. And that, of course, will vary from minister to minister, from government to government, and things of that kind.
He brought industry in the public sector and major industries, that is the bigger delinquents, into compulsory impact assessment, so that we could estimate the carrying capacity of our major industrial areas. We could estimate the impact these industry would have on air, on water, on soil, and their interface with the local people.
Prior to Rajiv becoming the Prime Minister, the consciousness towards environment, towards pollution, although was there in the statute books, was very perfunctorily practiced in India, both by industry and also by the regulatory bodies. We welcome much greater industrialization in the future. This does not in any way mean that there has to be a commensurate increase in pollution or in damage to the environment. And I know in many industries today, in industries that I operate in, the standards are the same as they are in international markets.
From here, on the banks of the Ganga, to fight and uphold the unity, to fight for and uphold the unity and integrity of India.
Took up what you call the cleansing of Ganges, because he thought that the Ganges is a river which is in the mindset and in the consciousness of the Indians as such. And therefore, if he would do something to that divine river called the Ganges, Ganga, he would be able to catch the imagination of the people all over and give them the message that you have got to keep your waters clean. You have got to see that the gutters don't enter into the rivers, that you have got to keep your wells and you see springs really crystal clear and clean so that to avoid diseases and others.
It is because of the Ganga Action Plan, which he launched, that we are today able to launch the Ganga Action Plan Phase 2, which takes on the Jamna. It is because of the Ganga Action Plan Phase 1, the one he launched, that we have now formulated the National River Action Plan.
He saw, for example, the Brahmaputra and the Ganga rivers as a big challenge ahead. And Rajiv Gandhi initially was very skeptical of large projects like Narmada. And I remember that he took hours. I mean, he was not going to let that go. And there were large dams which he stopped, incidentally.
Such as?
Well, even on Teri, the Planning Commission never gave it its approval. And he was the chairman of the Planning Commission. On Narmada, he must have spent hours on it. And it's only when he was really convinced that the hydrology, the water is there, that is satisfactory rehabilitation package has been derived, that families have in fact been rehabilitated in Gujarat, that groundwater was being monitored. I mean, he saw the computer charts of the groundwater monitoring systems between Mahi and Narmada, that there was a plan which was going to stop water logging. It's only then that he approved that project. For 2 years he held it up. And then he approved it. And then he supported it. He said, we have the technology, we will do it well.
At the end of the day, government becomes in some ways a hindrance to environmental conservation if all its actions are undertaken through the benevolent dictatorship of the bureaucracy. The extent to which there is people's involvement is the extent to which the success of conservation programs is going to be assured. Now, an NGO not being a part of this benevolent dictatorship is a body which in principle will be able to interact more easily and on more equal terms with the people themselves. And in that light, there would be a very important role for the NGOs. But at the same time, I don't think Rajiv was blind to the fact that there are many NGOs which exist simply in order to collect the grants and then disappear.
He encouraged NGOs, non-government organizations, to get into this particular movement, because Rajiv Gandhi knew it very well, that it's not merely by creating a ministry or through legislation that he would be able to solve this problem. This is a problem in which men, women and children of India must become involved.
Under the National Environmental Awareness Program, again, a lot of NGOs were involved. So the involvement of NGOs with the Ministry of Environment in a relatively big way starts off during that period.
INTAC, the trust which was formed, which is now in so many districts of the country, was his brainchild. It was his view, and INTAC has done some good work. So looking at INTAC, that helped in motivating more NGOs.
It was motivated by the fact that the heritage, whether the cultural heritage or the natural heritage, could not be conserved only through governmental action. It was a support mechanism, it was an awareness mechanism. The Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts was set up to commemorate the memory of Mrs. Gandhi in terms of her vision, and there, what she said, if I remember correctly her exact words, that a person at home with himself and his environment. I think that the fact that he responded to all this, he may not have in as many words, perhaps articulated it as some of the thinkers have done. What we have tried to do here, and especially some of our programs, is to look at the totality of the lifestyle and where man-environment issues are not a matter of man conserving the environment, but man being part and parcel of that environment.
अभी पल्स साइंस का कॉलीफ्लावर कैबेज लगा रहे हैं। अच्छा, वेजिटेबल कर रहे हैं। ऑयल सीज में क्या लगा रहे हैं? ऑयल सीज में आपका तिल मस्टर्ड ऐसा बोला है। अच्छा चलता है? अच्छा चल रहा है। मस्टर्ड यहाँ अच्छा हो रहे हैं। मस्टर्ड अच्छा उनकी तस्वीर निकाल रहे हैं।
By nature, he instinctively rebelled against ugliness, dirt, filth, diseases, flies, fumes, and this was perhaps the man who was so clean in his own life that he wanted what you call this sort of cleanness to be reflected all along. And with that, when he started moving into the streets, lanes and bylanes of the towns and the cities and others, he discovered that that particular filth was adding to the misery of the people. The suffering of the people was due mainly to the neglect of what you call the environmental conditions. So he started working on a plane whereby he could intertwine the considerations of environment with the considerations of economic development, because he believed in it, the two are compatible.
प्लांटेशन कब बना? प्लांटेशन अभी बना है, पहले साल है ये? हाँ, पहले साल में। दिखाओ जमीन, दिखाओ। 4-4 एकड़ है ये, यदि हिल्टी से मेड़ है वो मैं नहीं ठान है। कब से कर रहे हो? हाँ तो ये 25 साल से जोत रहा है सर। अरे उसे बोलने दो। पहले बलगर के नहीं रहा ये जो निकले यार मैं ना जाऊँ। फॉरेस्ट लैंड कब बनी थी ये? No, but then you must give them some alternate. They've been doing it for many years. There is no dichotomy between protecting the environment and development. They go hand in hand. We have, through the National Wasteland Development Board, started a number of programs, but perhaps the most important aspect is an involvement of all our people in this task.
Essentially, it's a very important program. We're losing as much land as we are recovering. So it is almost a status quo ante. The fact remains that our population is growing. Our food demand is galloping. Our food production at this point of time is 170 million tons, and it has to go to 270 million tons by the turn of century. Where is the land? The only way we could do this was to rehabilitate this wasteland. It's an extremely important problem. Now, much of our poverty stems from bad land, wasteland.
What he created was this National Wasteland Development Board to be within the ministry, but having a mission approach to afforestation and greening of the country, taking on areas which Forest Department was not taking on. And that worked very well, which is now today been constituted as the National Afforestation and Ecological Development Board.
We can modify our agriculture to suit the water that is available. It is not necessary to grow rice in the driest areas of the country. We have to adjust our cropping patterns.
Rajiv Gandhi was very clear that in this country you want really that it is too large a country to have a single paradigm of development. That what you really want is to develop an agricultural growth paradigm which is based on the land and the water, and the historical memories, the communities of that area, and which tries to resolve the problems there. And he really egged on the Planning Commission, and we took on the challenge. We really looked at how one can regionalize the country. We did it on the basis of land, of water, groundwater, of climate. And I think through time he got a very detailed kind of feel of what was going on, which he didn't have initially. I mean, let's face it. I remember he once asked me, we had built up a special food grains production plan, and a part of it was that after the drought we'll put in 600,000 shallow tube wells in the areas where the satellite pictures showed that there still was groundwater after the drought. And he asked me, he said, Yogendra, I understand the program is very successful. So I said, no, it's not doing well. So he said, why? You said it should be reviewed, and I've just got the last review report. And 4 lakh tube wells have been installed. So I said, well, the target was 6. And why only 4? And he asked me why. So I said, you know, part of the problem in the eastern region, for example, is that the peasant doesn't have properly defined property rights. And because of land reforms. And so what happens is that we can't really channel the bank loan to him, even though we give the subsidy of 3,000 rupees. And you know, when he would go out in the field, he would ask these questions.
I think the most important idea there was Panchayati Raj. At the moment, not only with respect to the environment, but with respect to almost any aspect of a villager's life, he has no control over it at all, because anything that government wants to make available to him is first planned without reference to the beneficiary, and then is delivered through the benevolent dictatorship of our civil service. There is no people's involvement, whether in environmental or any other matters. Now, the biggest institutional change, the biggest systemic reform that Rajiv wanted to bring about in our society was to get power down to the people.
When you talk about management at the village level, you talk about nothing but the management of the environment. Because what is a village? It is something which consists of wells and tanks and ponds and fields and forests and trees and livestock and all those kind of things. And that is central to it. Panchayati Raj can easily become a contractor's Raj, where instead of the local bureaucrat, it is the local sarpanch who becomes a contractor. He would have seen the whole point about how critical is it for local authorities, whether at the urban level or at the rural level, through the Panchayati Raj institution, through municipalities, to come to grips with the environmental problem. Because that's the only way to deal with it. I'm convinced in my mind that under no circumstances can centralized institutions deal with environmental problems. That, I think, would have been his biggest challenge.
One thing is certain, he would not be puritanical about environment. He would have liked to have blend of economy and environment, development and environment, conservation and environment, a blend. And this is a blend that is very necessary for our country.
I think he would have been happy with the economic reform. He would have probably pushed a little faster on some basic intermediates, because I think on sectors like nitrogenous fertilizer and on thermoplastics and on sugar and so on, we've gone slower than what we should have. I think some of us could have persuaded him to go a little slower on some other things.
Such as?
Oh, such as I think, you know, the consumer goods reform. Remember that the 1988 budget of Rajiv Gandhi went back and raised tariffs on color television and on things of that kind.
He would have felt that the pace of work is slow. You see, he was impatient to change India, and he knew that if India were to enter the 21st century, the time which is left for India is very short, and therefore one must go faster. One must go not only on the right direction, but in a direction with his speed to catch up the other countries and proceed further. And I am very sure that even in the area of environment, he would have said that we are slow, we are not making the effort which is necessary, we are not giving the importance which is called for. And he would have very much sympathized with some of the, I would say, social protests or the political protests which are becoming evident in respect of what you call neglect of environment problems.
We have not been able to decentralize environmental management down to village level. And that's what I was saying, that we have to get the Panchayati Raj systems into it. Even today, access to forest land by village people is still very, very poor. Some new steps have been taken in recent years, but even those steps haven't gone very far. Well, I guess he should have been very unhappy, because despite all the laws and despite all the institution building that has been done since then, there is no city whose air is cleaner, and there is no river whose water is cleaner, and so on. So there is a lot that has been done in terms of making laws, in terms of institution building and things of that kind. But as yet, I mean, there are no extraordinary achievements to show, and there's an extremely long way to go. So it's a major task before us.
I'd say that if all what has been done, if it had not been done well, there would have been water would have been contaminated to a point that you couldn't have even washed your hands. And I think he would have been happy with the way this ministry has functioned, and I think he would have been happier much more if much more had happened.
The actual deployment of environment-friendly technology in Indian industry, in Indian agriculture, in Indian aquaculture, in Indian economic development, Rajiv saw was intimately tied up with both easier access to environment-friendly technology from abroad, as well as inexpensive or relatively inexpensive, should I say, economic access to such technology, for which no international regime existed. So at the 9th Non-Aligned Summit in Belgrade, he made a proposal for what he called a Planet Protection Fund, the PPF, which unfortunately for us and unfortunately for the international community, Rajiv had time only to present to the world in outline, because within 2 months of his going to Belgrade, he ceased being Prime Minister.
It is now incumbent upon our movement to challenge the doctrine of domination in the economic sphere. The major economic powers are determined to perpetuate their dominance over the global economy. We fought colonial power without becoming colonialists ourselves. We fought military power without becoming militarists ourselves. Let us fight economic power without becoming exploiters ourselves. Let us concert our efforts. Let us present to the world a united front. We need a global effort to bring within the easy reach of all, developing and developed, the technologies that exist and are yet to be developed to combat pollution and environmental degradation. I propose the establishment of a Planet Protection Fund under the aegis of the United Nations. The fund will be used to protect the environment by developing or purchasing conservation-compatible technologies in critical areas, which can then be brought into the public domain for the benefit of both developing and developed countries.